Our Lisa Rubin was there inside the courthouse as this all unfolded. Lisa, what was that like?
Anna, in some respects, this was a disappointing end to the trial in the sense that Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts and received an unconditional discharge today. But judging by his behavior and his lawyer's behavior today in court, it was a very different Donald Trump. He understood that even though the unconditional discharge imposes no penalty on him, it definitely had a psychological impact, and he was a more respectful Donald Trump in court today, as was his lawyer, Todd Blanche, whose rhetoric in his filings and certainly during the trial had increasingly amped up both against the judge himself and against the prosecutors. That's not to say that they indicated their happiness with what happened today, but that having been said, it was definitely a more sober Blanche and Trump than I've seen in recent memory.
And I should remind everybody that we are expecting audio from the courtroom. We will play it in its entirety for you to hear. We were able to discuss what was said, but you will hear it in their own words, in their own voices. Everybody from what the prosecutor said to Donald Trump himself, and ultimately Judge Merchan, who closed it out with his sentence and his reasoning for that sentence. So as soon as we can get that audio turned around, we'll bring that to you at home.
We want to bring in retired New York State Judge Dianne Kiesel. Dianne, thank you for being with us. Just what kind of considerations do you think went into Merchan deciding what he decided today?
I think the judge needed to do, thank you for having me, by the way. I think the judge needed to balance, as he did, the interests of signaling to the world that Donald Trump needed to be treated like any other defendant in a felony case after conviction, while at the same time recognizing that this man is 10 days away from becoming president of the United States. And I think the unconditional discharge, while I'm sure will be criticized by some, was Judge Merchan's way of doing that. Remember, as some of your correspondents have said earlier today, this isn't really just a slap on the wrist. This is a man who is going to go to his grave unless an appellate court reverses as a convicted felon. And he's certainly the only president in history that's going to walk into that White House with a conviction over his head. That's serious.
And Judge, we expect Donald Trump and his team to appeal the conviction. That's what they said they've intended to do. Donald Trump said it himself. We heard Todd Blanche during this hearing say a couple of times this will be appealed. Do you think that there is any strength to that argument, and especially when you look at the way Judge Merchan handled this case? Were there any vulnerabilities or cracks along the way?
Well, if he's successful on appeal, it will be because of the United States Supreme Court decision earlier this year on presidential immunity. If you are just looking at the way Judge Merchan handled this case, I don't think there are any grounds in that avenue for which he can successfully appeal. The judge was fair. He was impartial, despite what Mr. Trump said all along the way. From my observations, this case was handled just like it would have been handled if this were Donald J. Smith on trial for a series of felonies.
I do wonder, given how much Trump went after this judge right up to the end. I mean, in statements last night, he said his family, which then was subject to the gag order. The family part was, which Donald Trump has complained about over and over again. But I mean, Judge Merchan had to endure a lot of attacks on his character, his integrity, his professionalism, and he never backed down. What do you make of that, Judge Kiesel?
Well, I think the judge gets an A+ for the way he has handled this case. Well, mind you now, judges always need to be fair and impartial, and they need to stand apart from any of the noise, either from the public or the press. But I don't know another judge, and whoever has been subject to this kind of constant harassment and criticism, and yet he put his head down, he did his work, he was fair, he kept his cool throughout the entire weeks of that trial. I think he was amazing and really deserves to go down in history as having done a fine job.
and that job will actually be able to hear part of that job, Judge Merchan, as well as Blanche, the prosecutors, and the president-elect, who this case just wrapped up. We're going to be actually able to hear it for the first time.
Yeah, any minute now. And again, as soon as we are able to bring that to you, stay with us. We will bring that to you. Judge Kiesel, I wanted to ask you about how things will go moving forward, right? You brought up the Supreme Court, and we know that Donald Trump has the ability to appeal. So how's that going to play out, especially with him in office?
Well, you know, appeals don't happen overnight in the great state of New York. First, he's going to have to appeal up the state court level, which means it goes to the appellate division and then to the Court of Appeals. And then perhaps he can move over into a federal court via habeas petition, citing this constitutional argument. Whatever happens, and my crystal ball isn't polished, I don't know what's going to happen. But whatever happens, it's going to take a while and could consume some part of Mr. Trump's second term in office.